And just a short background, the Bears Ears Monument took many years to be put together by this coalition. And it was declared at the very end of the Obama administration, 1.35 million acres in southern Utah, to be protected primarily for its cultural, spiritual, and physical attributes. And as you also know, in this new administration, it has been proposed to be shrunk to 200,000 acres. In other words, 1.15 million acres removed from protection. And that's being fought very diligently in the courts, and the tribes are very involved with those lawsuits, and we're going to see where that goes. But perfect. Great, how's that? All right. And I guess I just recall about 2 years ago, during the heat of this effort to get Bears Ears designated, our Washington, D.C. reporter, Elizabeth Sjogren, piped into a meeting and said, I just met this woman, Regina Lopez-Whiteskunk. We have to do a little profile of her. She's amazing. And Regina was in Washington, D.C., lobbying and was speaking to the National Press Corps. And she said this, she said, you can't separate a Native American from the land. We're so strongly tied. It's our history. It's our teacher. The artifacts left by the ancestors of today's tribes need to be preserved, she said. Our legacy is on the walls of the canyon. I can't afford for anybody to destroy what is there for my grandchildren. And Elizabeth, a Washington, D.C. veteran from NPR for 30 years, had never really heard language like that at a National Press Club. So she did a nice profile. It's in on the website if you haven't checked it out. It's a great place to get to know a little sliver about Regina. I guess I would just say that I'm just so looking forward to hearing directly from Regina today, and her wisdom, and also the complexities of trying to navigate this very complex world to get something accomplished. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Regina.
So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I guess my wireless mic. I'm going to move this over. Is that on? How about now? Good morning, everybody. I was about ready to send him out to the middle of the street there and do a town crier type of thing. I said, it would be totally traditional to have a town crier saying, she's coming out to speak. Wake up. So I do want to speak to a few things here directly. First off, my name is Regina Lopez-Whiteskunk. I'm a member of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. I'm of the Uinta and Weemanooch Band. The Uinta Band is located in northeastern Utah, where my mother's from. I'm enrolled with the Weemanooch Band, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, in the furthest southwestern corner of the state here. So to start my little discussion off, and first off, I want to make sure that you all understand that this is going to be an active presentation. So I want to hear from you as well. I'm going to be asking some questions, but I'm also going to want some response from you. So I hope you've had your coffee, whatever you needed, your tea, and a little bit of a wake up on a Sunday morning. And I ask the Creator to forgive us that we're not in church this morning, but you're rather here listening to me. Thank you. Thank you. It goes along with what I've always said. I'm in my church no matter where I'm at. So my first slide here, and I wanted to explain this a little bit. It says, I am her and she is me, our relationship with Mother Earth. And the whole reason that this symposium is so fitting is something that I've always spoke of during the campaign and my journey with the other 4 tribes to designation to protect and to preserve, but at most to have continued access to our lands. One thing that we always try to inspire people to do is to tell your story through whatever means that may be, whether it's writing, whether it's singing a song, whether it's drawing, whether you're creating something, but through the spirit and the mind and the heart of what's in your mind and in your heart, that you can communicate that through any means, any media. And so what we have here on this slide is a female with a war bonnet. And if you have any insight into history, females normally don't wear war bonnets. They're usually reserved for the chiefs or people who have achieved certain feats out there in the world, in their environment. But there is one time that a female does wear a war bonnet. She doesn't handle it, but rather the males will put that war bonnet on a female to wear, to parade. So they'll put that on us, they'll secure it, and we parade it for them. Right before I was elected to office, I was invited to visit some of my family in Idaho on the Shoban Reservation. I didn't know that my mother was hijacking me to take part of this really important ceremony that happens during the winter time. And so she just said, bring your moccasins. So I thought, oh, okay, so maybe we're gonna go to a powwow or something. So I grabbed my moccasins. And when I got there, one of my cousins, who I referred to as my sister, she said, come over to the house. I have a dress for you. And I said, okay. So I'm getting a little suspicious. So I'm like, why are we going to your house for a dress? Well, in certain circumstances, events, and protocol, we don't dress ourselves. We're dressed. Our family members bestow honor upon us by dressing us and putting things on us. So I didn't know that I was going to be a part of such an important time. So I was dressed in a dress, and all the other accessories were added on, hair ties, belt, that stuff. And we went over to what's called the Bonnet Dance. And I got to the Bonnet Dance, and they told me, now we need you to go up front. And I was like, okay. So I'm like, well, what are you guys not telling me? So I was actually put in the right behind the leader, who my cousin was, my sister. She was the leader for the women. So I was right behind her, and they had placed my grandfather's war bonnet, which was well over 100 years old. And my grandfather actually lived past 100. So it was this really fragile war bonnet. And it was put upon me, and I was asked to dance with my grandfather's war bonnet. That was a complete honor. But in the bigger scheme of it all, did I ever understand where I was going to go and what I was about to embark upon in the coming months? At the request of several elders, I was asked to run for tribal leadership. And I never thought in my wildest dreams that I could even achieve that by election. It's always really risky to put yourself out there and let others decide whether you should sit there or not. And a lot of times we focus on the or not, because I don't want to be the one that was denied or of that nature. Don't deal with that very well. But I took the risk at the request of my elders. I took that risk. But before that, I had to go back and ask for approval from my family and my elders, with the understanding that should I be placed as an elected leader, I don't just belong to my family, that then I would be belonging to my people. Well, I got elected. and I made it by 3 votes. So I was biting my nails, and I was like, did I really win? And because at some point, you get close, you're not racking up the numbers, you're like, it's over, I'm done. And, the whole shadow of doubt just came over me, and I was letting go of that whole thing and trying to cope through that situation. Didn't for a moment even stop to think that the last few votes were going to put me over that edge. And it did. And what an adventure I was about to embark upon. So the picture that I drew with colored pencils depicts a part of what I experienced. And at the time when I'd done this drawing, I didn't even have the faintest clue what was about to transpire. So the way I have always looked upon art, it's almost a channel from somewhere else that you communicate through whatever it is that you're doing. And so this was something that I learned early on without having to seek a grade, right, in art class. I wasn't going to be graded on this, but it was coming from somewhere. I'm not the type of person that sits down with a blank piece of paper and just starts sketching something out. That is naturally what a lot of Native Americans are, artists by nature. They can sit there and they can draw a buffalo, they can draw these really pleasant scenes in that. So this drawing actually comes from a very special place, an unexplainable place, a place of mystery. Because I'm not the type of person that sits there and says, I'm going to draw today and this is what I'm going to draw. So art, the art of being healed, and the great mystery are things that I learned to deal with. There are also those aspects that pull us through tough times, challenging moments. And that's a lot of where I came from and experienced during a lot of my work through the last several years. Really quickly, I'm going to run through some background here on the people, my people, which is going to connect everything. So as I go through, I'm going to stop and ask you a few questions and engage you in conversation. So the Ute people, we've always followed the seasons. And we've always had a long-standing, strong relationship with our Father, the Creator, Mother Earth, and the elements. Because we always thought of things in a circle. And one thing's always tied to another. One does not exist without the other on the same token. We wintered low, we summered high. We followed the game and the harvest of the resources. And all of this ties to seasons. There's a season for everything. So if my people were in the valley here, our harvest would look different, a little different from what your harvest would. You'd be harvesting your fruit and stuff that you've grown from the land. My people would be harvesting the game, because right now, my people are out hunting. My people follow the game. The ladies would be out collecting berries. And yesterday, Robin talked about taking what is offered to you. So berries are out there. There's stuff that are growing out there. So we partook of things that were obviously there for us to use. They're gifts of our Mother Earth. So while the men were out hunting, a hunting camp may be looking like a shade house, and you may see a structure of just maybe some poles going across, and until the guys come home or come to the camp and bring their harvest in, the women then would be processing the meat, so to say, and then we would be hanging the meat to dry so that we may have it in the colder seasons. We may be packaging it, putting it away, storing it. So our hunting camps would look very busy. So although the guys would be out on the hillside hunting, we'd be in the camps or we would be out on the hillside harvesting the berries and the various roots and other vegetables that may be out for us to take. We're very spiritual. There isn't a day and a time that we don't engage in prayer. And prayer for us, and I'm gonna use these interchangeably, is really moments of meditation. So when we speak of ceremony, we speak of being spiritual in prayer and time on ourselves. Really, when you think about it, we're in meditation. A lot of times people think just because of the terms, that means that maybe you're trying to be more like a different people, but you're not. We're not. It's just a word that describes the same state that we're in, which is prayer, quiet time of that nature. My people were divided, not necessarily divided, we were grouped in bands. So historically we had 13 bands, but over time and through movement and policy, they slowly dwindled down to 7 bands, and those bands then became tribes. So of the 7 bands, now we're down to 3 tribes, and the 3 tribes, 2 of the 3 tribes are located here in Colorado, with the other 3rd tribe in northeastern Utah, which is the Ute Indian Tribe of Utah. The 2 tribes that are here in Colorado are the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute. So this is a map that some of you may have or be familiar with, which shows the original territory of the Utes. And I was having a thoughtful discussion this morning and enjoyed my breakfast with these 2 lovely ladies up front here. And I said, you know, I'm going to share some maps of somebody who's told our story, but I don't agree with these because my people have actually roamed a much more vast area of land. How do we know this? We know this because of prayer. We know this because of the movement of those prayers out on the land and the different influences that our people still possess today. My great-grandfather was one of the last healers and medicine men for my people. He raised my father. My father was actually born out on the land. He wasn't born in a hospital. My great-grandfather, he possessed certain items and stories, all of which my family still possesses today. But these items are not necessarily of my people. They're very reflective of an interaction with a different people, a people of Mexico, and maybe even further south. I don't know. But these are things that tell us. This map here, which was put together based on somebody's collection of data, interpretation of that data, and physical evidence to where they could interpret into a story. So these are all collected based on somebody's intellectual interpretation. Not necessarily the same indigenous interpretation that my people have conveyed to us through stories, through family time together, which tell us different. My people have roamed a vaster amount of land over the generations. And something that's really interesting that not a lot of people are comfortable talking about, the changes that the outsiders provided to us and how we became who we are today. You know, the coming of the horse and the railroads. A huge piece of technology that was introduced into our world that changed our whole world. So the previous map there might have been prior to the coming of the horse, or not. But the coming of the horse meant that we could now get further out. Hence, we probably collected more enemies because now we were more mobile, we were quicker to get in and out. Now we became a people of force. We were still a people of few numbers, but we were a people of skill. And one of our greatest pieces of knowledge was knowledge of the land, knowledge of the mountains. We knew how to get in and out of those mountains very quickly. We maneuvered the high elevations and the very narrow trails, and we developed the trail systems in the mountains. So a lot of the trail systems that are developed in the state parks and the national parks probably have a deep historical tie to the indigenous people of the land. These strangers came into our land and began to claim the land. This was a very strange concept. We didn't know ownership. We didn't know ownership of land. We didn't know ownership of water. And we starting to get to this conversation about ownership of air. Precious metals were sought after. Later on, the minerals became an issue. Resources and the economy of the area being defined by strangers. The economy of game, the economy of just everyday life for us was very simple, based on survival, based on existence with the elements and our relationship with Mother Earth. Now it was changing, and it's still changing, it's evolving. Probably not to our likes, but when we think about the discussions between our grandmothers and grandfathers, in their views, their time, and in their space, life was so simple. And it's really funny because I always think about what my grandma, why can't you just understand? It wasn't that I wasn't understanding. It's just that our times are so different. What was necessary then, sad to say, might not be necessary today. But what is necessary today was even unthinkable to them. So there was a little bit of a communication barrier based on necessity of the daily life, duties, roles, and responsibility, that life has changed. So we're seeing that change of generation, we're seeing the change of knowledge, but there's one thing that we always need to remember. In order for us to go forward, we need to know where we came from. And that's the important piece that has to make the continued travel through generations, are those stories. Whether they're legends, creation stories, whether they're just a simple experience of boarding schools, or even just a personal experience we've learned along the way in our lives. So by 1868, this is the amount of territory that the people were allowed to be in. So we're starting to see the land have these lines that we're told you cannot go over here, you cannot, if the deer jumps over this line, you have to let it go. You go back over here and stay over here. If that berry bush is over there, don't look at it. I mean, these were really, it sounds a little funny, but they were reality for my people. They were a heartbreaking reality. Because we were people of the land. We were the land. The land was us because what it provided for us was how we survived, were our means. A few facts, just really quick. Ceremonies revolved around their hunting and gathering based on seasons, and we were always taught to try to strive to live in harmony with nature, because as food is plentiful, be thankful, be grateful. Ceremony and celebrations encompassed a 4-day period generally, and the most important fact about this was in ceremony, one of the most important moments was meal. This was the time to come together, to reflect, to share, because these were just the time that grandmother got to share her love in the preparation of the meal, to share the knowledge with the young ladies and the daughters in preparing that meal. The meal was an important journey for the females of the family, the females of the tribes, the groups. The Utes on record were also the last natives to have had conflict with the United States government, resulting in the confinement of reservations. It's an interesting fact. We were the last one on the book to have that last conflict, which happened in southeastern Utah in the region of Bears Ears. These are important facts. These are important elements in the discussion that I had many times. In 1882, the Utes were the last Western Native people to be forced onto reservations. Although they drew these lines, Grandma would go get those berries anyway. So in a funny way, we were taught to be a little defiant out of the sake of surviving and providing for our families. But the way we figured it, what you don't know didn't hurt you. So we did what we needed to. By 1873, now you see a huge chunk carved out in the San Juan area, San Juan Forest area. This area was going to become a key place later on in our history. Because although you see it carved out here, it was now going to enter into what is now known as the Brunot area. It is not a part of any trust land assignment, but it is a part of an important hunting and fishing agreement, a hunting and fishing treaty, which is what makes the Utes truly unique with the federally recognized tribes, because we are one of the few who has an active treaty with the federal government to date. And this is something we fight for. This is also something just right southwest of here. And so my people get access outside of the normal state seasons to harvest out in those areas. Not a lot of people understand that, but without education, it's hard to understand. Without knowledge of the history of that, it's hard to understand and grasp. So we've been working very hard with Colorado State Fish and Game to get them to understand this, because a lot of their officers go out without the understanding of what this treaty means to my people and why and how that came about. They sometimes give the people a hard time because they think they're out of season, when they're not. They're actually well within the rights of a treaty that is active and current. Chief Ignacio. Very important to my discussion in regards to Bears Ears. Chief Ignacio was a chief who represented the large voice of the Weemanooch band. And he said, "The whites did not keep their world. They give us land and a home where we have always lived. They eat bread and give us crust." Chief Ignacio spoke with the people and had a conversation with the people of the band. And it was agreed upon at that point that he would carry the message to the federal government that we would not enter into agreement to acquire the lands in small chunks. So in 1887, during the time period of the Dawes Act, which is also known as the allotment era, we did not parcel up our land. Of the 3 Ute tribes, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe does not have allotments because it was thought of at that time, we don't own the land. And not one person is going to say, this is your piece of land that you stay on it. Well, the Utes, we were active in movement. We followed season. And that's one of the reasons that the group said, we're not farmers, because if you received an allotment, you were held responsible to work that land. How do you work the land and learn a process you don't even know anything about? And that's how my people viewed that. So that very important decision, which is a very key element of traditional belief, we still don't have allotments with a very small piece that we actually, there is a group, but the allotments held in the Bears Ears area, in the Allen Canyon area, have a lot to do with the fact that there was a small group of Paiutes, the Allen Canyon Paiutes. Well, we kind-heartedly said, well, you don't have large numbers, you can be a part of us. You can camp with us, we'll help you along the way. They were negotiating their aspect of becoming federally recognized, but that didn't go through. We still kept them within our group, gave them a place to be and a group of people to be a part of. Well, they still managed to somehow get some allotment land. So there is a small group of that Paiute people that still live within our tribe, but they have individual allotments. The Weemanooch did not. We still have a contiguous piece of land that nobody owns. We all own it. So we don't like to say we all own it, but it is what it is. We've learned this concept because of the strangers that have come in and started to change our world and how we believed, how we had these discussions. So Chief Ignacio, the chief that held true, he did do something that I think is pretty interesting, and I say this is my chief because I can feel his blood boiling in my veins. He did the one thing that we did as 5 tribes. He did not take the allotment agreement, but rather he put together his own proposal and submitted it to the federal government. It sat on the desks in Washington, D.C. for over a year before they'd done anything with it. At which some point somebody got this and said, you know what, either we go with it or we don't go with it. They decided not to accept that proposal. So we had to go with what they proposed to us. We were originally located in the Bears Ears area, which was an original location for the agency to be established. But because the Mormons and the settlers out there didn't want us out there, we didn't have a Trail of Tears because we were being marched from here to there consistently throughout the lands here. We were basically told to go back towards the Ute Mountain, which is where we're located today. We have every reason to fight for that piece of land because that's where we came from. That is where they marched us away from. He was key in that he was bold enough to say, I don't want to accept what you're telling me, but I have a solution. Will you take it or not? They didn't. So it was rather fitting that 5 tribes come and say, you know, the Antiquities Act of 1906 is usually made in the best interest of Native American people for cultural resources, protection, and preservation. So it was only fitting that we step up and do exactly in the spirit of what Chief Ignacio did. We want to use that Antiquities Act, and this is how we intend to see it used. We put a proposal on the desks in Washington, D.C., and said, this is what we propose. We want 1.9 million acres in this region protected, preserved, and to allow us to have continued access for various reasons. So in the spirit of Chief Ignacio, we're still keeping that spirit alive. Yeah. So by 1972, this is what we look like. It's a whole lot smaller than the previous maps, correct? But you also see in southeastern Utah, you don't see anything over there. Right after this map was made, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe went into Utah, just south of Blanding, and purchased some land back. And we brought it into trust. So today we have a small community located near Bears Ears, just a few miles south of Blanding, that is a part of our reservation now. Also just a little bit down into New Mexico, another area we had to reacquire. We lost some land down there due to the fact that when the federal government makes mistakes, they by no means like to acknowledge that. But they will quickly try to make amends in the best way they can, and we know how that goes. And so they settled with us, and we were given a settlement, but we were told, we're going to give you X amount of dollars. With that money, you will go purchase land. So there we were again. We had to go back and purchase more land that probably belonged to us generations ago. So that is why I throw up that quote from Chief Ignacio. They eat bread and then throw us the crust. And that's what we've done over the years. We recently, after some time, had found a property that was up for sale near the Gunnison. So we currently have a ranch near the Black Canyon. We had to repurchase that. But we've had the darndest time trying to bring that into trust. We had hopes that we would have done it during the Obama administration. We don't think that we will through the Trump administration. But we have property. We pay taxes just like the rest of you who have property. But we still get treated unfairly because a Native American tribe, a federally recognized tribe, owns this property. For some reason, the county thinks that they're dismissed from their duties for providing services to that area, which is by far untrue. They do. So this is just recently, 1972. You see some areas there we've had to reacquire and go through some pretty strange processes to either bring into trust or not. So I've mentioned and I've alluded to the whole idea of 5 tribes coming together. So in July of 2015, on the foothills of the Ute Mountain, more than 5 tribes came together, and we had one of our first meetings. It was discussed on that day whether we would come together as one group, what was our next steps, identifying what our common goal was, and whether we wanted to do this or not. And I remember the whole morning being a discussion about what this region meant to us, the origins of our separate existence by tribes. So the Navajo, the Hopi, several Pueblos, a few Paiute tribes, and some of the tribes from the Grand Canyon area were all in the room. By noontime, we wanted to know who was going to step to become this group, or if that was something that we wanted to do. And I remember this because we were asked, after lunch, when you think about this and you're ready to commit or not commit, when you return from lunch, those that wish to be a part of this, we would like you to sit at the table. If you wish to take a different role and not be active in this participation of this group, we ask you to sit on the outside. We didn't ask anybody to stand up and be kind of the attention being brought to you, your decision based on a spoken word, but rather in action. 5 tribes sat at the table: the Navajo, the Ute Mountain, the Ute Indian tribe of Utah, Hopi, and the Pueblo of Zuni. 1 Pueblo. This was interesting because we sat down and the tribes at the table weren't addressed. We weren't recognized at that point yet. But who was recognized and given that platform were those who chose not to step forward. And they were asked, okay, give us your feedback and let us know what you're feeling. And they did. They said, we're not sure that we have a direct tie to the land. but we will support you, whether it's with a letter of support or a tribal resolution from our tribal governments. And that was enough said. We didn't ask any more. And so they stood up, they said the name of their tribes, and then they sat back down quietly. And at that point, they recognized the tribes at the table. And I, at that point, said, with the tribes at this table, I make a motion that this group become organized and be known as the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition. I quickly got a second. Everybody agreed. We were on our way to organization. This picture that's in this, thank you. So this picture that's presented here is the card at the top there was my name card the first time I went into the White House. And then myself, the vice chairman of the Hopi tribe, and an individual from the Pueblo of Zuni. The second picture there is the Department of Interior, our lawyer, and members of the White House administration, and then the 5 tribes. Again, 5 tribes. And something that I really want to share with you all today. This was the original 1.9 million acres that we proposed. This is the national monument that was decreased to. So you see 2 smaller areas there. Well, let me go back to this one first. So this was the 1.9 million. We ended up with a small portion there in the off to the left that was kind of cut out by the Obama administration. White Canyon, I think is what it was referred to. And then this is what was done in December of 2017. But how do we get to some of these places? We need to make a connection. Whether that's through conversation, songs, storytelling, painting. And this picture is my father. I remember this day because we were on our way to the meadows in Bears Ears, where we were slated to sit down with Sally Jewell, Department of Interior, and other agencies that were accompanying her to the public meeting in Bluff, which we turned poor little Bluff into this, this little community ready to burst that it seems. These are some pictures of some dancers. I put up there a piece of beadwork that I did, and this is a hand drum that was given to me when I visited the Northwest. The art of conversation played key in this. There's myself down in the far left corner talking to Governor of our great state. The other picture there, a little above that, was the tribes that had come together to testify against House Bill 4532, which was due to solidify the Trump what he had done, executive order. And then up there on the right-hand side is the former chairman of the Ute Indian tribe of Utah, who at that point, we were actually doing a roundtable in Telluride with community members, and so we were actively engaged in conversation in many different communities. And then there's me with Thinking Cap, which was a podcast out in DC, and so the art of conversation was something that we engaged in heavily. Why do we do this? We wanted to do this, and why I continue to do what I'm doing is out of the sake of preservation, permanent protection, as well as continued access, healing our ancestors, children, and elders. My grandmother, my granddaughter, my son. The future. The 2 young ladies up there on the left, the young lady on the right was of the Pueblo of Acoma, and we had just taken her to the UN this past spring so she could read a statement on the floor. And this was a little gal from South America, and I thought this was the greatest thing, was to see two cultures from different parts of our continent together. And on the right is my first granddaughter. And then that was my new addition there earlier this year. And so it's really about our future. This conversation and how we communicate and how we present our communications is really for their future. Now here's a question out to you all. What do you do when you're so tired and exhausted, but your cause means so much to you? How do you find that energy? Where do you find that at? What do you do? And those are all a part of it. But there's one place you have to go back and re-nurture. Self. Because it's self who is exhausted. I can't help those around me if I don't take care of myself. How do we do that? You all named off very wonderful examples. We go running. But one of the greatest things that I found and I stumbled upon was changing how my conversation and presentation was going to be. And I found a mechanism here. I used to love to run when I was younger, but the cause that I was engaged in, I needed to do something else. What was that going to be? What was that going to look like? And I stumbled upon this opportunity to become a part of an organization that was putting together a run. And Lord be, it's a run for Bears Ears. Okay, if that wasn't obvious. So there was a group of people that were trying to mirror the organization of the coalition. They wanted to put together the 5 tribes, and they wanted to do a prayer run. And so we did. So in March, we put this together. The 5 tribes ran, along with pueblos, ran from their pueblos and our communities, and we logged in over 800 miles running to Bears Ears in 1 week's time. So engaging the youth and asking the same questions, but allowing for other people to answer those questions, helps us to become and to evolve our causes and our efforts into a different manner. The land is our teacher. This quote comes out of the book and a piece that I contributed to titled Edge of Morning. I also contributed to Red Rock Stories. You know, it brings to mind, what is our voice going to look like? I've figured out that I have different qualities, I have different talents that I've stumbled upon, and I'm not getting graded on it. Drawing, singing, dancing, running, writing, speaking, conversating. I didn't realize that I had that whole gamut of art that I can present to people, to the world, and to share. And that's something that our elders always said, it does no good just to keep it to yourself. It may help you, but the true blessing is sharing. Take breaks. Take breaks from your cause. Become an observer and a listener. And open self up to moments of silence. Sometimes that can be the scariest thing that we can even begin to think about. Because there's this thing called the heart, and some of us forget to listen to the heartbeat. or go to a quiet place to hear it. The Utes have a word in our language, amanik. That means to sit still. When I was younger, they would tell us in Ute, they would tell us to sit still. Amanik. Think about what you're doing. Think about the next decision you're going to make. Think about what you're going to say. Because once you say it, you can't get it back. You don't want to hurt nobody. Be quiet for a second or two or more. But if that decision is a big decision, then go by yourself. Sleep on it. My mom always says, sleep on it. Okay? Take a break from it. But in order to do all the hard work that we do, we need to continue. We need to be reminded that we're just humans and we do get exhausted. But to go find that moment of quietness, seek out peace, and just think before we do what we do next, say what we say next. But just be still.
Hello. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you. Thank you.
As a member of this community, and I know some of you better than others, but it's such an interesting gathering of people into the modern Western communities. And we all have different stories. We don't have a story as deeply rooted in the land necessarily here, but all of us have a story that goes way back. And yet we're such a mobile kind of recreating, our towns are recreating all the time. You talk, how do we integrate our histories while respecting the histories of others and creating new communities? And I'm wondering, in your experience with the Bears Ears, not only working within the 5 tribes, but working within the larger structure of the society and other communities and Anglo leaders, how you navigated that world, and any insights you might have, and how we integrate.
You asked a very complex question there. We might take an extra hour to even scratch the surface on that one. You know, I just finished working for the Ute Indian Museum in Montrose, and I worked in the capacity of being the education director. But you ask a very common question, especially in a lot of the mountain communities and surrounding areas to Montrose. And they ask, how do we integrate, the history of our establishments, our communities, our towns? And one of the things that always struck me is this, to me, I would think that you would acknowledge it right away, or understand, or even observe it. But most of the communities, when they develop a lot of the festivals and a lot of the celebrations, they all celebrate and go back to a time period of when that community was first established. 1876, 1890, you hear dates like that. And one of the things that seems to not be acknowledged was, well, prior to that date, what was this place? Who was here? What was the history of that land? What was the use of that area? And so I think one of the things that we can start to do is to acknowledge what was prior to those times of establishment, whether it was prior to the coming of the railroads, the town, the establishment of the town. However that may be, I think just to realize that there were people out there. It might not have been their season when the towns came through and began to see, maybe that wasn't the use of the land at that time, but there were people around. And one thing that's always interesting for me to archaeology, they look for physical evidence, and it's a simple principle that we're taught. And I remember this because I had just camped with my mom and dad through the summer, and one of the things that she reminded me of when we broke camp was like, leave it as though we weren't here. So I was like, oh my God. Well, that's why the archaeologists cannot find evidence of my people before, because this is a chief driving principle of my people. We leave things as though we weren't there. So of course you're not going to find cooking utensils, because Grandma made sure we cleaned up. And right down to we try to brush away our tracks. So my mom would say, I don't have a broom, but I have this big brush, and so she'd come through. And then we would leave and drive away from the campsite. So those are some real simple things that sometimes we forget. And oops. But to navigate through some of the politics, the politicians specifically, the bigger challenge was through Utah. I will be very honest, I was very naive in coming into that experience. It was interesting because the first time I actually had to appear or agreed to appear in Salt Lake City to testify before a committee over there, I had just finished testifying in committee here in Denver. And so I was like, oh, sure, I got this made. I can do this. I've got a little bit of a week's worth of experience, right? I got to Utah, and I quickly realized I wasn't prepared to go through what I was about to prepare to go through. And to deal with elected officials of today is very different. In another state, I guess. It was just, it blew my mind to think that another human being could treat another human being in that fashion, which is, if you pick up the book Red Rock Stories, I really write about that experience. It was a very shocking and hurtful experience, but it gave me the experience to continue to know that I was going to have to be more strategic in navigation through the whole experience. I was treated very disrespectfully, and I was actually the only female who sat on the coalition and came from a pretty tough educational background. I come from the world of technology. So my formal education, I have a degree in information technology, so networking, troubleshooting a computer, that was my world. But that also became one of my strengths too, because in order for me to navigate these systems, to mentally put a schematic together really quickly on the fly, to know that I was going to need some mapping of how I was going to do this, based on information collected, experiences, and what historically my former leaders went through was going to become the map that I needed to learn how to navigate through. Wasn't easy. I quickly learned state politics versus national politics, especially going from Utah to Washington, D.C. was going to be very different. A world apart from Colorado. At least in Colorado, people liked me. Some might even say they actually appreciated me coming to speak to them. That was not the case all the time in Utah. So I experienced both extremes. I had both extremes. I was loved and appreciated here, but told to go home over here. And even if it was historically my home or the home of my mother's people, I only lived 2 hours away from this area, not even a half hour away from the state line. I was still told to go home. And it's because of these arbitrary lines that we were never asked or consulted on, whether that was state lines, county lines, reservation lines, whatever line that was. It was a part of my lack of experience in understanding what those lines really meant.
Thank you. That was great for a small. I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience.
Hi. This is maybe along the same lines as your question, but I believe that as the ancestors of the outsiders, like we really suffer in not having relationship with the natives, So I want to ask what you think we can do, like in our everyday lives, to support relationship with Native people.
Great question. Very common question, great question. And I get this question asked a lot, again, like I said, especially in the mountain towns, which is probably where a lot of the history of the people were, because the Ute people were known as the people of the mountains. We were mountain people. And I don't believe it's support, and I'm going to steer away from the word support, but I believe that word should be replaced with, how do we coexist? How do we exist with one another in the same space? Acknowledging history, acknowledging the past, but also acknowledging the fact that we can't change the past, but we can sure put the best foot forward to create a better tomorrow. And one of the ways that we can do that is establishing a relationship. Because as you all see here, and I mentioned this yesterday in my prayer, I'm so thankful to be out here. I've had very little time or opportunity to be out here. I've had no reason to be out here, because when those arbitrary lines were drawn for a reservation, we were told to stay on those reservations. So there was really no point of trying to be this defiant by coming this far out of our reservation lines to be a part of a community. And it's kind of risky for someone like myself to come in, let alone, I think one of the things that because I also sit on the Telluride Institute in Telluride, and this is the same discussion that we're having on a more frequent basis. How do we navigate this? How do we create this and establish a relationship? And one of those is, I'll tell you what, Colorado is like the place for festivals in the summertime. I mean, we have a festival for everything, right? We're not going to stop celebrating one thing to the next. Well, in those festivals and moments of celebration, why aren't we inviting one another to be in these same places? And my recommendation to people are, let's have dinner first. Maybe we have that. I love the dinner on Friday night in the alleyway there. That was great. Because as you've seen in my presentation, what is the most important part of ceremony? So it makes complete sense that we start somewhere. It would be I was talking to somebody and I said, it would be great to have a harvest meal together. Not necessarily that we're celebrating the whole facade of Thanksgiving time, the cornucopia of sharing the same space, but something that is more specific to our area, our land, our history, and celebrating those stories. Because I imagine the original homesteaders probably had interactions with the Native people that were out here. And they probably developed a very rich and tight relationship that those stories never get told. Because the only stories, as we know, that get told are stories of conflict, trauma, and things like that. So I think that, part of what we can do is bring those great stories, find those stories, have a meal together, include one another in celebrations. And I know in the springtime, the Ute people have what's called the Bear Dance, and we celebrate the awakening of the bear. That's our New Year's. So by all standards, the Native Americans do not go by the calendar year. We also have adopted celebrations like Christmas, New Year's. That wasn't ours, because our New Year's was at the moment of spring when we began to come together after an awakening of the bear and new life begins to sprout. That's New Year's. It's a celebration of life. And so, we have that open to the community. We have that open to people, and you're welcome to come down. It happens annually in the springtime. And so, to be able to share those important celebrations together and extending the hand of welcome is absolutely important. It might start small. Maybe I'm the first. Who knows? I might be the seed.
Thank you so much for coming here and sharing with us, Regina Lopez-Whiteskunk. So through my travels in South America, there's a lot of conversation right now among many people about this eagle-condor prophecy that is the story of indigenous cultures of the North uniting in solidarity with cultures of the South, and kind of rising in prayer and sharing history and story. And I'm wondering if that's at all in conversation here among the Utes.
Oh my God, you have no idea. You just asked the perfect question. So historically, as I mentioned before, my people, we've gone in vast travels from here to there, and we show different evidence that we've been there. Well, earlier this year, like I mentioned, I had the honor of accompanying a small delegation of individuals, well, I should say females to the United Nations. And one of the things that was so exciting was we met a couple of individuals from Mexico and from South America, and they heard about us. And it was rather surprising to know that they heard about our movement and our efforts to protect land and our use and our indigenous existence out on the land. And they even knew about our run that we did in March. And this was just a few weeks after we had done this. So this is amazing. And I love technology when it works and it is safe. But because of that, they also said, the next time you run, we might not be there, but we will run from where we're at. And these were people from Mexico and South America. And so these discussions, the part that really was rewarding was the title that we used, a prayer run. We were running in prayer in graciousness to the opportunity to partake of the land and have the honor to put our feet down on the earth. And so that is very much a part of an active discussion. We might not always be in the same room, but I think we're all together in spirit and in prayer. Any other questions? Comments? I was going to say criticisms? No.
It's funny you say criticisms. Thank you for your talk so much. My question is about art. And you said a couple of times, non-graded. Talk about that a little bit for me.
Yes. It's interesting because of policies that have been imposed upon the people, the Native people, it was assumed that we are less than human and that we always had to measure up to a standard. We had to fit into a system that was being proposed and imposed on us. Education to the Western society means sitting in a school, reading books, listening to a teacher standing in front of you, slap down the ruler when you're not listening. Without knowing that education happens even at home, preparing a meal, taking part in ceremony, because you're constantly under direction of an older person. So when I constantly said ungraded, that always puts a pressure on a person to want to perform to a certain standard, to measure up to a certain standard. And I had the honor of attending an Indian boarding school for 1 year, but I graduated out of a public school system in Cortez. Went to school there for 12 years, and when I seemed to perform well and do things or produce product was when I knew I needed to be graded. I had a deadline, and someone else was going to be putting that pressure on me to produce something. To find that personal space to be self-dedicated sometimes is harder to find within oneself. And so we always do this weird little balancing act, and for a long time, I always see my people like this. We're so overwhelmed in trying to measure up, make the grade, fit into somebody else's world, that this basically almost is holding nothing. So self-worth really becomes pretty close to non-existent.
We have time for one more question. We're going to go way in the back.
I want to know, like, when and where the spring party is again, and like, is it like potluck style? Should I bring like coleslaw chips, buffalo maybe? Like, I want to make sure when I come in, like, if I see a bunch of horse and feathered men up on a ridge, like, what should I do? Is there like a smoke signal should be putting off or something?
That sounds like a movie. No, we have our annual bear dance in the spring. The Southern Ute Tribe has theirs the last weekend in May during Memorial Day weekend, and then the following week is the Ute Mountain in Towaoc. And then prior to those two, at various points, the Ute Indian Tribe has a few communities that have bear dances up there. They're not pinned to the Ute Mountain and the Southern Ute. We've designated these. We've spoken for those dates for the next millennium. So we know that's going to happen. But we do. We invite everybody. You don't need to bring anything, just yourself and a good time. And by the way, if you go inside the lodge, you're free game. The women, it's a dance of women's choice. So I encourage you to come out.
Thank you. All right, everybody give it up for Regina.